The summer sun blazed over the immaculate white marble of Arlington National Cemetery, painting everything in a sharp, almost sacred glow. A soft breeze stirred the flags, making them flutter gently above the hushed crowd gathered before the tomb of the unknown soldier. Even children instinctively whispered here. It was a place where laughter felt out of place, and footsteps dared not echo too loud. Then the spell broke. A loud burst of laughter cut through the air like a stone through glass. Heads turned sharply. A man in bright designer sunglasses, a gaudy floral shirt, and glittering sneakers stood near the rope barrier, grinning at his phone. He chewed gum like he owned the ground he stood on, the reflection of the solemn tomb shimmering off his mirrored lenses. He spoke into his phone's camera, voice dripping with mockery. "Look at this guy, Mr. Statue," he snorted, zooming in on the solitary figure approaching from the far end of the black mat walkway. Every head turned as the tomb guard emerged. Perfectly pressed blue uniform, white gloves, polished rifle shouldered with mathematical precision. Every step measured to the exact inch. Heel strikes, toe rolls, pivot like a human metronome beating for the fallen. The guard's expression was a mask of stone, eyes locked forward. Every muscle taut with centuries of tradition behind him. The crowd grew silent, except for the tourist. He chuckled loudly and clapped slowly. "Wow, a real-life wind-up toy," he called out, making a few teenagers snicker. Their laughter died as quickly as it rose when a nearby veteran glared at them. A little girl tugged her father's sleeve and whispered, "Why is he making fun of him?" The father didn't answer. His jaw was tight. The tomb guard's boots struck the marble with soft rhythmic thuds. He didn't glance at the man. He didn't blink. His eyes were locked on eternity. The tourist smirked wider, flicked his gum onto the stone, and muttered just loud enough, "Bet he won't even flinch." Phones began to rise, quiet red dots blinking. The veteran folded his arms. A mother pulled her son closer. The tension in the air tightened like a drawn bowstring. The crowd thought he was harmless, just another loudmouth looking for attention. But in the next moment, they were about to see what honor truly means. The air over the plaza shimmered under the summer heat, carrying the faint rustle of flags overhead and the quiet murmurs of the gathered crowd. Each pair of eyes followed the guard's deliberate steps as if watching something ancient, something sacred. To most, he was just a soldier in a crisp uniform, faceless behind the mirrored sunglasses and the cold discipline. But behind that perfect posture was a man who had walked through hell and clawed his way back out. His name was Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes. Just 3 years earlier, he had been thousands of miles from home, sweating under the weight of body armor in the burning deserts of a war zone. He remembered the grit that stuck to his teeth, the metallic smell of gun oil and dust, the relentless ache in his legs from endless patrols. But most of all, he remembered Ryan. Corporal Ryan Blake had been his closest friend, the kind of soldier who carried more than his share, who cracked jokes to calm others even with shells exploding in the distance. They had made promises to watch each other's backs and talk about all the things they'd do when they got home. That promise broke in a single thunderclap. One moment Ryan was ahead of him, motioning him forward, and the next the ground erupted in fire and smoke. Daniel could still hear the ringing in his ears from the blast, still see the torn earth where Ryan had stood, still feel the hollow weight of Ryan's dog tag pressing into his palm when they found it later. There had been no body to carry home, just silence where Ryan's laughter used to be. Grief followed Daniel home like a shadow. Nights were the worst, jerking, awake, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding as if still on the battlefield. Guilt gnawed at him with quiet persistence. He stopped laughing, stopped answering calls, stopped believing the world could be anything other than noise and loss. And then one grey November morning, he found himself wandering the rows of white headstones at Arlington. It was the silence that struck him first, not empty but full of unspoken words, unmarked sacrifices, names that would never be known. In that silence, something shifted. He couldn't save Ryan, but maybe he could stand for him. Maybe he could stand for all of them. That was the day he applied for the tomb guard. The training nearly broke him. He marched until his legs gave out, polished his rifle until his fingers bled, memorized the names and dates etched in stone until they blurred in his dreams. He learned to stand perfectly still in thunderstorms, to march perfectly straight through blistering sun, to silence every tremor of muscle and thought until only duty remained. When he finally earned the silver badge's tiny carved tomb, glinting in the light, he cried for the first time since the war. Now, each measured step he took across the black mat was for Ryan. For all the Ryans, he never spoke of it, never let it show on his face. But every tap of his heel against the marble whispered their names in his mind. The man watching him now knew nothing of this. His name was Carter Briggs, a 32-year-old travel influencer with a private jet, an entourage, and millions of followers who adored his reckless bravado. He had never worn a uniform, never stood at a graveside clutching a folded flag, never felt silence press on his chest like stone. Carter saw the world as a playground and its people as props. He thrived on controversy, poking sacred things to watch people flinch. He had once mocked palace guards in London, once danced on the steps of a memorial in Rome, once filmed himself blowing kisses at monks in Thailand. His followers rewarded each stunt with more views, more sponsorships, more fuel for his arrogance. To Carter, Arlington was just another backdrop. He didn't see the marble soaked in history, didn't feel the weight of the soil holding thousands who never came home. He saw only an opportunity, one more statue guard to provoke until he cracked. He strutted up in loud sneakers, chewing gum, swinging his phone like a weapon, thinking he was untouchable. But the tomb of the unknown soldier is not a place for games. Since 1937, guards have stood there without pause through hurricanes, blizzards, burning sun, and even during terrorist attacks. They march 21 steps, pause 21 seconds, then return. 21, the highest military honor. They do not flinch. They do not speak. They do not break bearing. Even in the face of death, they remain still, because their stillness is not weakness. It is respect carved into flesh and bone. Daniel knew all this in his bones. He had lived every inch of that discipline. He had been watching Carter from the corner of his eye since he stepped to the barrier. Bright shirt, restless hands, restless eyes. But Daniel's face never moved. He kept his gaze locked forward, shoulders back, rifle balanced on his shoulder like the weight of history itself. Carter mistook that silence for fear. He thought this soldier was just another actor, another stiff uniform waiting to be shaken out of character. He thought he was about to go viral. In his mind he could already see the title, Tourist Makes Stone Soldier Blink. He grinned at his screen, oblivious to how close he was to crossing a line no one dares cross. Around them, the air tightened. The crowd had grown quieter, as if sensing the tension gathering like thunder behind the clouds. A veteran in a faded cap folded his arms, his eyes hard. A mother pulled her little boy closer. Even the children had gone still, as if they knew this place was older and heavier than laughter. Daniel's boots struck the marble in precise rhythm, echoing off the pillars like a heartbeat. Carter raised his phone, tilting it for the perfect shot. His lips curled into a smirk. "Let's make history," he whispered to himself. He had no idea how right he was. The moment Carter Briggs raised his phone, something in the air shifted. The respectful hush that usually hung over the tomb fractured, replaced by a brittle kind of tension, like glass under strain. Even those who had been whispering moments ago went quiet. Everyone could feel it. That invisible boundary between reverence and arrogance trembling on the edge of being shattered. Carter stepped closer to the rope barrier, the toes of his garish sneakers almost brushing it. The screen of his phone reflected the blazing sun, capturing the solemn figure of Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes as he glided across the black mat with mechanical precision. Daniel's posture never changed, chin lifted, spine locked, straight, eyes fixed like a rifle sight down the invisible line of duty. His white gloves caught the sunlight as his hands moved in perfect sync with each stride, rifle balanced across his shoulder like a promise he refused to break. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carter announced into his phone, his voice carrying through the tense silence, "behold the legendary robot guard of America. They say he can't blink, can't talk, can't even sneeze without permission." He exaggerated a yawn. "Let's see if he can smile." A ripple of discomfort passed through the crowd. Several people frowned. A father gently lowered his daughter's phone. "Show some respect," he muttered under his breath. Not loud enough for Carter to hear, but enough to earn a grateful glance from a nearby veteran. Carter only smirked. He turned the camera on himself, winking. "We're about to test if this guy's alive or just wind-up clockwork." Then he clapped loud, sharp. 3 times. The sound cracked across the plaza. Daniel did not so much as flick an eye. His boots struck the marble with the same unwavering rhythm. He reached the end of his measured path, pivoted with surgical precision, and began his return march. The clapping echoed away into silence, swallowed by the stone. Carter's grin faltered for a flicker of a second, then returned wider. Okay, tough guy," he said. "Let's up the game." He crouched suddenly and scooped something off the ground. The wad of gum he had spat earlier, now flattened and gray on the sun-baked stone. With an exaggerated flourish, he lobbed it gently onto the black mat. Gasps hissed from the watching crowd. A teenage boy muttered, "No way," under his breath. The gum landed with a soft tack near Daniel's next step. Daniel did not break stride. As he approached the spot, his heel rose and fell with the same metronomic rhythm, yet somehow, without breaking pace or gaze, the side of his polished shoe slid the gum perfectly off the mat with a single precise motion, sending it skittering back toward Carter's feet. He never looked down. He never acknowledged it. The motion was so controlled it felt almost inhuman. The crowd exhaled in something like awe. Carter's jaw tightened. His cheeks flushed red beneath the expensive tan. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The guard was supposed to crack, to flinch, to give him the clip that would light up his comment section. Instead, this stone-faced soldier had dismissed him with a gesture so subtle it was almost contemptuous. "All right," Carter muttered into his phone, his grin growing strained. "Let's see if the statue bleeds." He stepped over the rope. A ripple passed through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Soft gasps. Sudden stillness. Even the birds in the trees seemed to go silent. Carter swaggered forward a few feet onto the sacred black mat, his sneakers squeaking against the surface. "Sir." A sharp bark cut the air. Daniel's voice, it was the first sound he had made. It was thunder in the silence. "Return behind the barrier." The words cracked like a rifle shot, clear, commanding, and cold. Carter froze mid-step, eyes going wide. The sheer force of it seemed to press on the air itself. For a moment, it almost worked. Then Carter forced a laugh and turned his phone back on himself. "Or he speaks. Did you hear that, guys? We got him to talk." "Return behind the barrier," Daniel repeated, his tone cutting sharper than the sun's glare. Somewhere in the crowd, a child whimpered. A veteran straightened to attention without realizing it, but Carter only grinned wider. "Or what, statue man? You gonna blink me to death?" And then he did it. He closed the distance in 2 quick strides and stopped right in front of Daniel, so close the guard's reflection warped in his sunglasses. Carter's voice dropped to a mocking whisper meant only for the phone's mic. "Say, cheese." The camera flash strobed. Daniel did not move. His expression stayed locked, every muscle carved from iron. The flash faded. The air tightened. Then Carter lifted his foot and tapped Daniel's boot, a small, sharp kick. It was quick, almost playful, like someone nudging a mannequin to see if it would topple. The crowd gasped as one. Several people cried out. A mother clamped her hands over her son's eyes. The veteran's jaw clenched like stone. Carter rocked back on his heels, grinning wildly. "And there it is," he said to his phone. "World's toughest toy soldier." But something had changed. Daniel's boot had shifted half an inch from the impact, and now, it moved back. Deliberately. The heel tapped back into its exact print on the mat. His eyes, hidden behind mirrored lenses, rose with glacial slowness until they locked directly onto Carter. The effect was terrifying. It was like being pinned by the gaze of a hawk. The plaza seemed to fall away. The sun dimmed. The crowd vanished. There was only Carter and that empty of anger, empty of fear, filled with a stillness so absolute it felt like the pause before an avalanche. Daniel spoke. "You have disrespected the tomb of the unknown, soldier." Each word was measured, deliberate and cold as the marble under their feet. Carter's smile wavered. He chuckled, a thin, nervous sound. "Relax, man, it's just a joke. Leave this post." Daniel cut in, his voice rising like steel scraping stone. "Or be removed." The words rolled out like a drumbeat of centuries, echoing off the white pillars. The crowd was utterly silent. Even the air seemed to wait. Carter's phone trembled slightly in his grip. He opened his mouth, then shut it. For the first time, doubt flickered behind his sunglasses, but pride was louder. He spread his arms theatrically and turned to the crowd. "See, he's breaking character. This is the part where he last warning," Daniel said, voice low but carrying like a bell. That was when Carter saw it. The guard's hands had moved. One gloved hand had shifted to the rifle, slow, precise, measured. The crowd gasped again, not in fear, but in something else, something like awe. Because the guard wasn't flinching, he was preparing. Carter's grin faltered into something almost like panic, but it was too late to back down. He took one more defiant step closer. The soles of his sneakers squealed on the marble. The distance between them was barely a breath. Carter's phone hovered inches from Daniel's face. "You don't scare me," he whispered, and Daniel did not move. The stillness had become something colossal. It wasn't human anymore. It was tradition given flesh. The crowd stood frozen, breath held. Then the rifle snapped off Daniel's shoulder with a sound like a thunderclap. A hush rippled through the crowd like a breeze over still water. The guard stood frozen, posture perfect, eyes locked forward as if carved from marble. The tourist hovered just inches away, his sneakers squeaking on the polished stone. He'd been circling closer with each taunt, like a hyena testing a lion. Now, There was no space left to hide behind laughter for a heartbeat. It seemed he might back off. He smirked, half turning to the onlookers, as if expecting applause for his performance. But then his face hardened, twisted by some private grudge. He spun back, stepped right into the guard's path and kicked it. Wasn't a hard blow, more of a sharp jab to the shin, but the shock of it cracked the air like thunder. A collective gasp erupted. A woman near the front covered her mouth. A child clutched his father's hand. The marble plaza itself seemed to shudder, and yet the guard did not move, not a muscle, not a blink. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The tourist blinked, his grin faltering as the reality of what he'd done caught up. His shoe had left a faint scuff on the guard's immaculate trouser leg, and for the first time, he seemed unsure. Around him, phones were raised like a field of glowing eyes. He had wanted attention, now he had the world watching. Then the guard moved. It was not a wild reaction or a flash of anger. It was precise, controlled, and terrifying in its calm. The guard's heel shifted back a fraction. His ceremonial rifle came down from his shoulder in one seamless arc. The movement made a slicing whisper through the still air, and the polished bayonet gleamed in the sun as if to remind everyone that this was not theater, this was duty. The guard's voice boomed like a cannon. "Stand back." The words ricocheted through the courtyard. They weren't loud by volume, they were loud by authority, each syllable sharpened on discipline and tradition. The tourist actually staggered back, eyes wide. He'd been expecting silence, maybe a scolding glare, not this living thunderclap of command. For the first time, the crowd cheered, not loud, not wild, but a swelling murmur of relief and awe. Several veterans in uniforms straightened to attention. The tourist stumbled further back, hands raised halfway as if in surrender, his earlier bravado leaking away like air from a punctured tire. The guard took a single measured step forward, boots striking the marble with surgical precision. The sound echoed like a gavel. His ice-cold steel behind his sunglasses didn't break contact with the tourist. The bayonet stopped inches from the man's chest. "You will respect this post," the guard thundered. The words hit harder than any weapon. Even the pigeons on the roof had gone silent. The tourist froze, mouth opening and closing without sound. He wasn't grinning now. He wasn't anything. Just a man caught naked before the weight of something older, stronger, and infinitely larger than his ego. Security guards at the perimeter stirred, ready to intervene, but they paused, sensing the strange, perfect balance of the moment. The guard was in control, not out of fury, but out of duty. His posture didn't waver. His grip didn't tremble. It was like watching a mountain rise and speak. The tourist took another step back. His heel slipped on the edge of the stone, and he flailed to catch his balance. The crowd collectively held its breath, half expecting him to fall, half praying he would vanish. He steadied himself with a sharp gasp, then lowered his hands like a scolded schoolboy. The guard, satisfied the threat was contained, pivoted with robotic precision. The rifle rose back to his shoulder in a blur, bayonet flashing once before settling still. He marched back to his original Mark III sharp steps, halt, spin until he stood again as he had before, as though nothing had happened. But something had. The plaza was utterly silent, not the quiet of boredom, but the reverent stillness of a church after a bell stops ringing. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. The tourists who had been giggling earlier now stood with heads slightly bowed, as if in apology. The child who had clung to his father earlier whispered, "Is he a soldier?" And the father nodded without looking away. The tourist remained frozen in place, face pale, hands twitching at his sides. He seemed small now, shrunken by the weight of what he had defied. It wasn't the rifle that had broken him. It was the unshakable stillness, the living embodiment of sacrifice that had refused to bow even when kicked. A ripple of motion came from the far end of the plaza as two uniformed military police began walking briskly toward the scene. Their boots clicked sharply, the sound slicing the silence. The tourist heard them and winced, but he didn't move. The guard, still as stone, didn't so much as glance their way. His duty was to remain, to endure. The MPs reached the edge of the ceremonial path and stopped. They didn't speak to the guard. They didn't even make eye contact. Their respect was absolute. Instead, one of them addressed the tourist directly, voice low but firm. "Sir, you need to come with us." There was no defiance left in him. He nodded once, jerky, and followed like a man underwater. As he passed the line of onlookers, the veterans glared, the families looked away, and the phones tracked every step. He kept his eyes down, as though the weight of 1,000 silent judgments pressed on his shoulders. As the MPs led him away, the plaza slowly exhaled. People lowered their phones. Conversations resumed in whispers, but no one laughed. No one clapped. The echo of the guard's command still hung in the air like the toll of a distant bell, and at the center of it all, the tomb guard stood unmoved, rifle at shoulder, eyes fixed on eternity as though the world had never dared breathe against him. The march of the military police faded into the distance, their measured footsteps swallowed by the murmur of the crowd. The tourist trudged between them, his shoulders hunched as though bracing for an invisible storm. He no longer strutted, no swagger remained. The fire that had driven him to mock and provoke had burned out, leaving only smoke and ash. The plaza had become a silent theater, and every eye was on him. Cameras tracked his every movement, phones, DSLRs, even a television crew that had been filming a documentary on military tradition. Their boom mic pivoted after him like a curious bird. What had begun as a cheap stunt was now being immortalized from every angle. He glanced over his shoulder once, just for a second, back at the solitary figure still standing watch. The guard had not moved, not an inch. That stillness seemed to crush him more than any punishment could. There was no rage, no triumph in the guard's posture, only an unbreakable calm, as if nothing could reach him, not even contempt. The MPs led the tourist to the perimeter, where security vehicles waited. One officer murmured into a radio while the other opened the rear door of a black government SUV. The tourist hesitated on the threshold. He glanced at the crowd, perhaps hoping for anyone to defend him, to declare it was just a joke gone too far. But all he saw were 1,000 pairs of eyes filled with quiet disdain. Then the veteran stepped forward. He had been standing near the back of the crowd, wearing a faded Marine Corps ball cap and leaning on a wooden cane. His posture was stooped with age, yet when he spoke, his voice carried like a drumbeat. "Son," he said, and the single word made the tourist flinch. "You just tried to spit on every man and woman who never came home." The words struck harder than the guard's command had. They landed heavy, final, undeniable. The crowd parted around the old Marine like waves around a stone. He did not shout, he did not curse. He simply stared at the tourist with eyes that had seen real battlefields, and the tourist could not look back. The MPs paused. One of them gave the old man a respectful nod before gently guiding the tourist into the vehicle. The door closed with a soft, almost ceremonial click. The SUV pulled away, leaving only the echo of tires on stone. The plaza exhaled as if it had been holding its breath for hours. Conversations bubbled up again, soft, reverent, disbelieving. People who had been filming slowly lowered their phones, staring at the footage as though unsure it was real. And then, as if on cue, the tomb guard moved. The crowd fell silent instantly. The guard pivoted with surgical precision, boots clicking on the marble. He paced his measured 21 steps along the black mat, turned crisply, paused for exactly 21 seconds, then returned. Every motion was flawless, a dance of discipline honed by endless repetition. The symbolism struck like lightning. The world had just exploded around him, an attack, chaos, confrontation, humiliation, but the guard's ritual did not break. He returned to his sacred duty without hesitation, as though the storm had never touched him. Someone in the crowd began to clap, just once, hesitant, then another joined, and another. Within moments, the plaza thundered with applause, not wild cheers, but the deep, rhythmic respect given to warriors. The sound rolled like distant artillery, steady and solemn. The guard did not react. He did not acknowledge it. His head stayed forward, his rifle steady, his steps exact. The applause washed over him like rain over stone. The veteran raised his hand in a slow salute. A few others followed suit, fellow servicemen, off-duty soldiers, even a young boy who mimicked the gesture with trembling fingers. The cameras caught it all. The humbled crowd, the lone sentinel, the unbroken ritual. Within minutes, the moment hit the internet. Clips surged across social media under hastily made hashtags. Comment sections filled with shock, reverence, and rage at the tourist's behavior. News outlets scrambled to identify him. Some networks froze the frame on the instant of the kick, zoomed in on the guard's unflinching face, and titled it, "The Moment Honor Stood Tall." By evening, millions had seen it. By nightfall, tens of millions. The tourist's name was leaked, his old interviews, his brash travel videos, his history of provocative stunts. Sponsors cut ties. His own fanbase disowned him. Meanwhile, the guard remained unnamed, faceless, silent, just the sentinel, as the headlines called him. Reporters swarmed Arlington the next morning, but they got nothing. The guard did not speak. He simply walked his line. 21 steps, 21 seconds. Turn, repeat. The tourists watched in reverent hush, children clutching miniature flags. The moment had gone viral, but the man at its center remained unmoved. And somehow, that made it even more powerful. Dawn bled gently across Arlington the next morning, turning the marble rows of headstones into endless silver ghosts standing watch. The air was cool, crisp, and strangely still, as if even the wind understood the weight of what had happened. News vans lined the distant road, their masts extended like metal skeletons. A few journalists lingered beyond the rope barrier, whispering to their cameras, but they stayed back. No one dared break the sacred silence again. Inside that hush, the tomb guard walked. Each step echoed softly on the black mat. 21 paces, halt. 21 seconds, turn. 21 paces back. His boots cut the morning like clock hands, keeping time not for the living, but for the lost. His jaw was steady, his eyes unfocused, yet burning with purpose. Somewhere deep behind that stony mask, he could still feel the chaos of the previous day, the flash of the tourist's leg, the roar of the crowd, the sudden heavy silence, but like a wave crashing against granite, it had broken and slid away. He had remained, that was what mattered. That was why he was here. Beyond the barrier, a small crowd gathered again, quiet, respectful. They weren't tourists this time. Most wore dark suits, medals pinned to their chests. Among them stood a boy from the previous day, clutching a folded flag so tightly his knuckles were white. His mother rested a hand on his shoulder. His father's photo, tucked into the boy's other hand, caught the early sunlight. The guard's gaze never shifted as he passed, but he saw it. He always saw them. A faint rustle came from behind the crowd. A figure in a full-dress uniform approached, silver eagles gleaming on his shoulders. A colonel. The crowd subtly straightened. The colonel removed his cap, tucked it beneath his arm, and stood motionless for several moments as the guard made his slow, measured return. When the guard halted at the mat's end, their eyes met for just an instant. The colonel's lips tightened, his face unreadable. Then he raised his hand in a crisp salute. The motion was sharp, perfect, carrying decades of weight. The guard did not flinch, did not break, but inside, something stirred, something warm and fierce, like an ember catching light. The boy saw it all. His eyes went wide. He whispered to his mother, voice trembling yet sure, "He's a hero." The word hung in the air like the chime of a bell. A few heads turned, and soft smiles broke through the crowd's solemn faces. The mother pulled the boy gently close, but her own eyes glistened. The guard pivoted and resumed his patrol. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need to acknowledge the applause, the headlines, the salutes. His duty was older than all of it. He was not there to be seen. He was there to stand for those who could not. Later, when the relief guard finally marched out to replace him, the changing of the guard ceremony was sharper than ever, bayonet glinting, rifles snapping, shoes striking in flawless unison. As they passed, the relieving guard caught his eye for just a heartbeat. No words, just the faintest nod, so subtle the crowd missed it. Off the mat, in the shaded barracks behind the plaza, the guard sat alone for the first time in hours. The silence felt heavy. He reached into his inner pocket and drew out a small, worn dog tag on a chain. The metal was warm from his body heat, edges dulled from years of being held. His thumb traced the name, etched there, his best friend from the war, the one who hadn't come home. For a long moment he just sat, shoulders bowed, the stillness no longer public but deeply personal. Then he slipped the tag back inside his uniform, straightened, and exhaled slowly. Tomorrow he would walk again, and the day after that, and the day after that, because stillness, he knew, was not the absence of strength. It was its proof. Long after the crowd dispersed, long after the headlines faded and the internet found new distractions, the echo of that moment remained etched in the marble, carried on the quiet air of Arlington like a ghost of honor itself. The world had watched a man try to shatter sacred silence with arrogance, and it had watched silence win. There were no speeches that day, no fiery rebuttals or dramatic punishments. There was only stillness, discipline, the kind that cannot be performed or faked, the kind born from years of sacrifice and sleepless nights, from holding a friend's hand as he slipped away on a distant battlefield, from standing guard in snow and rain and blistering heat for those who can no longer stand at all. That is what broke the tourist, not anger, not force. Stillness did, because stillness is not weakness. It is strength refined until it no longer needs to raise its voice. The guard didn't stand there for applause, or cameras, or even gratitude. He stood there because someone had to. Someone had to say, without words, that the fallen are never forgotten, not for a second, not for a single step. And maybe that's what struck the world so deeply. In an age that moves too fast to remember, here was a man who moved slow so the world couldn't forget. If that moment stirred something in you, if it made you pause, made you breathe a little deeper, made you stand a little straighter, then carry it with you. Share this story. Tell someone what you saw. not to glorify conflict, but to honor the quiet courage that defends peace. Because long after the flash fades and the noise dies down, honor endures. And somewhere, beneath the soft morning light, a lone guard is still walking, 21 steps at a time,